Hello again. This week we're going to begin to tackle the huge subject, well it is for me anyway, of York hallmarks. I've been prompted to do it because there are quite a few pieces of larger York silver coming up on the market in the next couple of weeks, which is very unusual. Normally there isn't that much York silver about, believe me, other than odd pieces of flatware. And secondly, and this was pointed out to me by more than one person that I know, there's been something of a cataloguing disaster for one of these lots. It's a beaker, very nice beaker, it's sale in Scotland, and it's catalogued correctly, it's catalogued as the correct maker, it's catalogued as York, they've got the date right, but then the catalogue description goes on to say, with additional London hallmarks. And a lot of confused people have got in touch with me and say, is this right? Is this rare? No, it's a misunderstanding again, which I'm flabbergasted happened within a specialist silver department. But there you go. You pays your money, you takes your choice. And if you look back at my previous videos, there is one about the troublesome leopard's head. And obviously the cataloguer that catalogued that beaker didn't watch that video, otherwise they wouldn't have made this mistake. And basically after 1720, the leopard's head, which is the London town mark, it crops up elsewhere. It crops up at other assay offices for differing periods, but it's adopted in the later life of the York Assay Office from about 1776 all the way through the 19th century up to about 1862. It's adopted as one of their marks. So if you see that on a piece of York silver, don't get excited and think, oh, it's a York piece of silver with additional London hallmarks. It isn't. Those are the York hallmarks. And this piece that I have seen the hallmarks of, this beaker, they're all York marks. You know, the cataloguer has unfortunately just dropped the ball. So I'm going to run through York hallmarking, maybe one, maybe two videos. It might take a while, might put some of you to sleep. But I'm going to do it in serving spoons, which I have eventually borrowed from a friend. It has involved me leaving the house and travelling some distance to pick them up. And I have had to clean them for him, which is disagreeable. But at least I can show them to you now. Now, I want to start off with this one. This is amongst some of the earliest York silver that you're going to see. And again, we're concentrating about the later period. The York Assay Office closed sometime in about 1714, 15. And then it reopened sometime, it's not definitive hard and fast dates, in around 1776. Now, the partnership of Hampstead and Prince formed in the early 1770s, and this, as you may see, has three tiny marks on the back of it. And the marks are, I'll try and do some of these in close-up, conjoined JHP. Now, in Gubbin's book, which is really the definitive book on York silver, he dates this as a 1780s mark. Now, whenever I've encountered it on pieces like this, on spoons, on flatware, it has often only been struck 3 times. It's alongside no other assay office marks. So I believe this to be one of the earliest marks used by that partnership. Indeed, I believe it is their mark that's specifically designed for gold work, but actually because of the size of it, sometimes, like on a narrow stem spoon like this, it's used instead of their much larger, much chunkier IH over IP mark, which if you'd struck it on the back of this stem would either have distorted it, and then when it's been hammered over it wouldn't have been clear. So I believe this dates to around 1776. It may even predate the beginning of assay. It may be a mark that they put on when they were just retailing wares before the assay office was established. Curiously, the one curious thing about this is it's struck 3 times. Wherever else you get provincial marking trying to mimic London hallmarks, you will get 4 punches on English silver. So duty dodgers will have 4 punches. A lot of Exeter or Newcastle silver where they haven't submitted it for assay, you will have 4 punches. But in York, you get 3. Why? I'm not sure, but you do. So that is amongst some of the earliest marking. And that's just maker's mark only. I've shown you that. That doesn't really impact on what we're doing, but it's interesting. The next thing, again, this is a serving spoon of approximately the same date as that. And the marks on this have been deeply struck and then hammered back. So they've spread the stem, and they've been hammered in, so they've been pinched over. And again, I'll do a close-up of those. Now, this is a very odd type of hallmarking, and I've only ever seen it in 2 places, in York and in Newcastle. But on Newcastle silver, I've only ever seen it on sugar tongs. So it doesn't apply to any other Newcastle silver that I'm aware of. And what's happened here, excuse me, is you've got the maker's mark, the larger cruciform maker's mark, struck twice either side of a standard mark. And that again suggests that the leopard's head punch, which was introduced in 1776, and you do see very early on, that wasn't about when this was marked. So again, this is suggesting this is really very early. This is the earliest because there's no standard mark, but then they've cut a standard mark, so they've struck the maker's mark just twice either side of the standard mark, and then slightly later on you will just get the leopard's head, and then when they're introduced you will get the date letter, but we'll look at one of those later on. And again, that's a very York thing to do. And I've seen it on spoons, but I haven't just seen it on flatware. I've seen it on goblets too. So it just suggests that as the York Assay Office is setting up, they're finding their feet and they're striking. It takes time to cut these marks. And in the interim, they're using 1 mark, then they're using 2, then they've got all 3. But to substitute the right number of punches for them, they just strike the maker's mark multiple times, which I hope makes sense. Now, the next earliest example we've got, now this is when things are up and running. This is 1783. So it's still very early for York silver. If you're looking to collect York, and really the rarities, particularly with flatware, are anything from the 1780s and 1790s. There wasn't an overwhelming production at that time. Lots of stuff has been melted down or worn away or traded in. And it's quite rare to get these lovely early pieces of flatware with, those are quite super punches on the back there. That is the standard early Hampstead and Prince mark in a square. That's the one you're more likely to see. Then we've got the standard mark, and there we've got the leopard's head turning up for the first time alongside the date letter. So that does, you could look at that and there is no town mark. And the reason is the York town mark, for I don't know why, for civic pride or because it's quite a complicated punch of the city arms, is a good 2 times the size of any of these marks. So when you strike it, it creates quite a lot of surface distortion, which on big objects doesn't matter, but on little spoons and smaller objects it does. So it is almost never struck on flatware. And there are exceptions which we'll touch on as we go on, but it is almost never struck on flatware, which is why it is such a rare and sought after mark. That could easily be confused with London if you didn't know what you were doing. The only thing to say is, of course, you'll notice how irregularly the marks are struck, and this is a feature of York silver. It is all hand struck, and certainly at the start of the assay office they can all be a bit higgledy-piggledy. So that's 1783. Obviously in 1784 we get the duty on silver, so things become a bit more regular. So this is only 1 year later. Again, a serving spoon, but you can see the marks, they're the same marks, same maker's mark, standard mark, leopard's head, but here you've got the duty mark incuse in this case, and a date letter. And possibly because the duty mark has to be struck and things are getting a bit more established, neater. At least they're struck in a line now, and the marks start to neaten up from that period onwards. The date letter for this period, 1784 and 85, is a J, capital J. Beware, in 1795, which was an I date letter, very, very occasionally, and possibly by mistake or design, a J occurs. This J is reused. It is one of the rarest date letters in York silver. So do be aware that if you see this J with a later style of maker's mark and with a cameo duty mark, that is one of those later rare J's, and there are only about 2 or 3 of those known examples of that mark known at that period, used at that period. So that's extremely rare. And I was fortunate a few years ago to buy one on a fork for, for the price of a fork, which is not very much indeed. As we move into the 19th century, these big serving pieces, again, are struck, but there is an omission of the town mark. You will only see the town mark on large pieces of serving silver, and not every piece of silver is going to have it. So small things like pepperettes, cream jugs of this period will not have a town mark. This is why people pay a premium for those York objects that do have a town mark struck. They could be requested specifically by a client, but flatware does not have a town mark. There are 2 exceptions to that. In 1790, there was a service of Old English pattern flatware. I've only seen 2 pieces of it ever. So maybe it was a service, or maybe it was just a set of forks or something. They bear a superb impression of the town mark. That was done by client request. Then in the late 1830s, 1838 up to 1840, the York Club, and I've got a piece here, instructed the firm of Barbara North to make a canteen for them. It was sold originally, it stayed with the club up until the 1960s, and it was sold originally in 1966. It first came to market and has subsequently been split up and disseminated through collectors. It should have a Tudor rose engraved on the back for the York Club, and every piece should have a York town mark on it. So whatever size it is, it will have, let's try and get that in focus, and that's a cross with 5 lions in a circle. It will have that rare York town mark on it. And it's interesting and worthwhile knowing this, because if you're on a budget and you can't afford the very expensive cost of larger serving pieces or big pieces of hollowware, your best bet for getting a York town mark is to hunt down a piece of the Yorkshire Club service. It will still be expensive because it's got a town mark, but because it's a smaller piece of silver, it will at least be affordable. And by affordable, I think anything between £200 and maybe up to £500 for an example. And I've got something interesting to show you at the end of all this that relates to that, if we've got time. Through all the different partnerships, Hampston and Prince, Prince and Cattles, Cattle and Barber, Barber and Whitwell, James Barber and Co. This is Barber and Whitwell. You'll see they make lovely large serving spoons. This is particularly fine. It's got its original point. Beautiful, beautiful crest. No town mark. Absence of the town mark. That is 1821 to 23. That's the K date letter, which was used for a number of years. And even here, Barber, Cattle and North, again, Lovely, they're really good at making these serving spoons. When you get a nice fiddle pattern one, it's usually got a wonderful crest on it, heavy gauge, but no town mark. Then something interesting happens. In about 1835-36, it goes from being Barber, Cattle and North to James Barber and William North. And then for some odd reason, exactly the same sort of thing, nice serving spoon, this time initialed, for no reason really at all, they start striking the town mark on these larger spoons and fish slices. You do not see it before that point, unless it's been specifically requested and it's an aberration. But from about 1835-36 onwards to the end of the assay office, almost all, touch wood, almost all of these large serving pieces will have a town mark. Now I'm going to continue, but I've gone on too long, so I'll see you in part 2.